Bell sound. They said Jun-ho didn't bleed red. He bled ice water. The ghost of Gangnam had buried his heart so deep, even he'd forgotten where. His fortress of glass and steel ruled Seoul's underworld with one sacred law written in blood. No strangers ever crossed this threshold. But on a storm-racked Tuesday night, Hannah, his invisible maid, faced an impossible choice. She brought the only family she had left, her grandmother Rachel, into the devil's domain. Thunder cracked as the servants' entrance clicked shut behind them. Rain hammered against marble floors that had witnessed executions. Hannah's pulse thundered in her ears as she heard them. Footsteps. Italian leather on stone. Steady, deliberate, merciless. Jun-ho emerged from the shadows, blood still wet on his knuckles from whatever nightmare he'd just delivered. Hannah pulled Rachel close, her body a useless shield, waiting for the bullet that would silence them both. But the shot never came. Instead, she heard something that shouldn't exist in this house of horrors. The whisper of expensive fabric hitting cold marble. When Hannah opened her eyes, Seoul's most dangerous man wasn't reaching for his gun. He was on his knees, his perfectly controlled posture shattered, his head bowed low before her grandmother, and on his face, for the first time his 27 hardened killers had ever witnessed, were tears. "How many?" he choked out, his voice fracturing like broken glass. "It's me. It's Jun-suk. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now let's continue." Hannah's phone shattered the darkness at 2:17 a.m., its shrill ring cutting through the humid silence of the servants' dormitory. She fumbled for it, heart already racing with the certainty that middle-of-the-night calls never brought good news. "Miss Chen, this is David Park from Riverside Care. We've got a gas leak in the main building. Small, but we're evacuating as a precaution. Can you take Rachel for the night?" The words hit like cold water. Hannah sat up too fast, making her narrow bed creak. When? 30 minutes. "I'm sorry. We're calling everyone now." Her mind spun through impossible calculations even as she pulled on yesterday's jeans. Hotels. Booked solid for some tech conference downtown. Shelters. She called 3 of them last month during the plumbing crisis. All at capacity. Her room here at the Chin estate. Strictly forbidden to guests per her contract, a rule Mrs. Chin enforced with the rigidity of natural law. Lightning split the sky outside her single window, illuminating the sparse room that had been her home for 2 years. Thunder followed, rattling the glass. The storm had been building all evening, and now rain hammered the roof in sheets. She stood frozen, phone still pressed to her ear, watching water stream down the window. The choice crystallized with sudden, terrifying clarity. The mansion or the streets. Mrs. Chen's fury, or her mother wandering lost in a lightning storm, because her daughter couldn't figure out basic logistics. Not a choice at all. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive back was a nightmare of flooded intersections and zero visibility. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, silver hair wild from being woken, her hands worrying at the seatbelt with increasing agitation. "Where are we going, baby girl?" Her voice held that particular confusion that meant she was slipping backward in time, seeing Hannah as the child she once raised rather than the woman gripping the steering wheel. "Somewhere safe," Hannah said, the lie tasting bitter. "Just for tonight, Mama." The mansion's gates loomed ahead, iron bars black against the storm-lit sky. Hannah's hands tightened on the wheel. One night, she'd hide Rachel in her room, get her back to Riverside before Mrs. Chen's morning inspection at 7. What could possibly go wrong? Hannah's key card beeped softly at 3:17 a.m., the servants' entrance concealed behind sculptural gardens where twisted bronze figures stood sentinel in the darkness. She guided Rachel through the narrow corridor, past the industrial kitchen that gleamed even in shadow, toward the common area where staff sometimes caught brief moments of rest between demands of running a 40-room monument to cruelty. The mansion sprawled above them like a mausoleum dressed in marble and money. Cold stone, colder memories. Even the air felt weaponized here, filtered and climate-controlled to Jun-ho's exact specifications, as if he could regulate the very atmosphere at his will. Hannah had learned to move through these halls like a ghost, invisible and silent, Her existence permitted only insofar as it served his needs. She settled Rachel on the worn sofa, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders despite the perfectly calibrated temperature. Her hands moved automatically, preparing tea in the small kitchenette, while her mind calculated risks. Junho had left for a late-night meeting, which could mean anything from actual business to the kinds of activities she trained herself not to think about. If luck favored her for once, he wouldn't return until dawn. "What a beautiful home," Rachel murmured, her gaze drifting toward the ornate crown molding visible through the doorway. "Your employer must be a kind man." Kind. The word landed like a stone in Hannah's chest. She thought of Junho's smile, the one he wore for cameras and clients, all practiced warmth and calculated charm. She thought of that same smile in private, sharp as a blade before it cut. Monsters didn't announce themselves with horns and fangs. They wore Italian suits and spoke in measured tones and convinced the world of their kindness, while they slowly dismantled you, piece by careful piece. Hannah began. Footsteps, Italian leather on marble, that distinctive rhythm she'd learned to fear. Her blood turned to ice. He was back early. Rachel looked up, curious. Hannah's mind raced, frantically searching for an explanation that wouldn't damn them both. But there was no time, no escape. The footsteps drew closer, steady and inevitable as a death march. Junho moved through the main hall, like a storm that had finally spent itself, his men peeling away to their posts with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who knew better than to linger. Blood crusted the knuckles of his right hand, and a fresh cut above his eye leaked crimson down his temple, mixing with rainwater that dripped from his hair. The metallic tang of gunpowder clung to his clothes, sharp enough to make the air taste wrong. "All quiet, boss," his second-in-command reported from the shadows near the staircase. "No issues." Junho nodded, but his feet didn't carry him toward his office or the whiskey waiting there. 20 years in this life had taught him to trust the prickling at the base of his skull, the animal awareness that something sat wrong in the ordered world he'd built. His gaze swept the empty corridors, the too-still darkness that should have felt familiar but didn't. He turned toward the servants' quarters. Each step echoed against marble floors. A countdown Hannah felt in her bones as she stood frozen in the doorway of their small room. Rachel's breathing had finally steadied behind her, but now Hannah's own pulse hammered so loud she wondered if he could hear it from the hallway. His shadow appeared first, stretched long and distorted by the dim light. Then the man himself, rain-soaked, blood-marked, his presence filling the narrow space like smoke. Hannah stepped forward instinctively, placing herself between the doorway and Rachel. Her hands trembled as she lifted them, not in surrender, but in the universal gesture of a mother shielding her child. Words died on her tongue. What could she possibly say? She'd already composed her final plea, already decided that if begging would buy Rachel one more minute, one more breath, she would fall to her knees without hesitation. But Junho's gaze had already moved past her. His eyes locked on the elderly woman sitting upright in the corner, her weathered face illuminated by the single lamp. The recognition that crossed his features wasn't immediate. It was slow, creeping, like dawn breaking over something terrible. His expression shifted from cold assessment to something Hannah couldn't name, something that looked almost like he'd been struck. Time itself seemed to fracture in that moment. Junho stood frozen at the threshold, his expression cycling through shock to disbelief to something that looked like physical pain. The color drained from his face, as if someone had opened a valve and let his composure pour out onto the floor. His knees buckled first. The man who held boardrooms captive with a single glance, who commanded empires with surgical precision, crumpled like paper in rain. His perfect control shattered like glass hitting concrete. He fell forward, catching himself on his hands, head bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the scarred wooden floor, shoulders shaking with tremors he couldn't suppress. The word that ripped from him came in Korean, raw and broken. "How many?" "It's me." "It's Jun-suk." Before Hannah could process what was happening, the door burst open. Junho's men flooded in, guns drawn, faces hard with professional threat assessment. They'd heard something in their boss's voice that had triggered every alarm. But they stopped short, frozen by the impossible sight before them. Their untouchable employer on his knees, weeping like a child, his perfect suit jacket twisted, his shoulders heaving with sobs he'd probably been holding back for decades. Rachel's weathered hand reached out slowly, trembling as it touched his dark hair. Her voice cracked around the name. June-suk? My little June-suk. Hannah's world tilted sideways. Who was June-suk? The name sounded foreign in the space where Jun-ho had always lived. And why did that name make her powerful employer sound like a lost child finally found? A memory flickered unbidden through her mind. Something Rachel had mentioned weeks ago, a fragment Hannah had barely registered. A boy who used to visit her market stall 20 years ago. Rail-thin and desperate, stealing bread from her cart when he thought she wasn't looking. A boy she pretended not to notice, because what else could she do for a child so hungry his hands shook? Hannah's breath caught. That boy, that 12-year-old ghost with hollow cheeks and frightened eyes. He was kneeling on Rachel's floor right now, weeping into his grandmother's hands. The truth comes out in pieces, broken between Jun-ho's ragged breaths. Each word dragged from somewhere deep and buried. 20 years ago, before the empire, before the ruthlessness, before he became someone who could order lives ended with a phone call, there was a housekeeper named Rachel who worked in Seoul's university district. She'd find him sleeping in the alley behind her building. A boy of 12 or 13 with bruises flowering across his ribs and hunger carved into the hollows of his face. She never asked his name. He never offered it. But for 3 years, she fed him. Rachel gave him her deceased husband's old clothes, worn soft with age. She called him grandson in that way older Korean women do, claiming strays as their own. She'd leave food wrapped in cloth at the mouth of the alley, rice and kimchi, sometimes soup still steaming, and he'd take it without thanks because he didn't know how to anymore. The scars mapping his back and the silence wrapped around like armor told her everything she needed to know about where he came from. She didn't pry. Some stories, she understood, are written in flesh and better left unspoken. One winter, after a beating brutal enough to leave him unconscious in the snow, she dragged him inside. For 2 weeks she nursed him in her tiny room, cleaning wounds that should have killed him, spooning broth between cracked lips. When he finally opened his eyes, lucid for the first time, he looked at her with something that might have been gratitude. Then he vanished. She searched for months, haunting every alley and underpass, asking questions that led nowhere. Eventually, she assumed what everyone assumes about disappeared boys in Seoul shadows, that the city had swallowed him whole. Jun-ho's voice emerges hollow, scraped raw. I joined a gang, survived, climbed. Each word cost him something. Forgot everything that made me weak. His eyes find Rachel's face, ancient now, but still recognizable beneath the years. Including you, especially you. The fluorescent lights hum overhead. Somewhere a monitor beeps its steady rhythm. Rachel keeps her hand on his, gentle and impossibly forgiving, while he finally remembers what it cost to forget. Jun-ho finally raised his head, and tears carved clean paths through blood drying on his face. The motion seemed to cost him something fundamental. Pride, perhaps, or the last remnants of the armor he'd worn for so long. His voice, when it came, was stripped of everything but raw truth. You saved my life. Fed me when I was nothing. Loved me when I deserved nothing. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she reached toward him, stopping just short of touching his ruined face. Her words came soft but devastating. Each syllable a surgical cut. Jun-suk, what did you become? The question broke him further. Something crumbled behind his eyes, and he began to speak. The words poured out like poison from a lance wound. Every horror, every calculation, every murder. He spared nothing, his voice mechanical as he detailed the empire built on fear, the man he constructed piece by piece from the starving child she'd once known. Hannah stood frozen near the doorway, watching her understanding of him rewrite itself in real time. Fear didn't disappear. It transformed into something infinitely more complex, a recognition that monsters weren't born fully formed but built from accumulating choices and hardening scars. When Jun-ho finally fell silent, the room felt heavier, as if his confession had added physical weight to the air. Rachel sat motionless for a long moment, her weathered face unreadable. Then she spoke, and her verdict was neither condemnation nor absolution, but something far more devastating. Profound sadness. That boy I loved is still in there. I see him crying. The words found something in Junho that violence never could. His shoulders shook once, hard, before he forced himself back under control. When he spoke again, his gaze remained fixed on the floor, unable to meet her eyes as he made his vow. I will protect you, whatever it costs. I owe you everything. The promise hung in the air between them. Not redemption, not forgiveness, but the first honest transaction he'd made in years. Hannah understood then what she was witnessing. Not a killer's momentary weakness, but the terrible price of love remembered, of debts that could never truly be repaid. Dawn breaks over Seoul like a bruise, purple and gold bleeding across the skyline. Junho stands before his assembled organization in the compound's main hall. 20 men who've watched him kill without hesitation, who've never seen him falter. Their confusion ripples through the room like wind through wheat. Rachel is under my protection, he says, his voice carrying the same cold authority that's ended lives. Anyone who touches her answers to me personally. The silence that follows tastes like copper. These men have worked for him for years, some since the beginning, when he was still learning how many ways a human body could break. They've never seen him protect anyone, never watched him show attachment, never witnessed what they're seeing now, weakness wearing his face. Min Jae shifts his weight, hand unconsciously moving toward his weapon before stopping. The others exchange glances that speak volumes in the language of violence and survival. Junho doesn't explain. He never explains. He simply turns and walks to the guest wing where Rachel sits with her worn Bible, morning light catching the silver in her hair. Hannah stands guard nearby, a sparrow watching over a lamb in a den of wolves. Let me repay what I can never repay, Junho says, and for once his voice carries something other than death. The guest wing. Resources. Safety. Whatever you need. Rachel looks at him with those eyes that have seen too much grace to be afraid of monsters. Only if Hannah stays with me, she says. Not a request. A condition. She brought me here. She stays. Hannah's breath catches. This is her new reality. Crystallizing like ice. Trapped between gratitude and terror. Her grandmother protected by a killer. Herself bound to both by chains of debt and circumstance. The apartment she cleaned just yesterday feels like a memory from another life. Junho nods once. Agreement sealed. But across Seoul, in a penthouse where the city spreads below like a conquered kingdom, Kim So-min received the intelligence report with a predator's smile. His rival's careful distance, his legendary isolation, his inhuman efficiency, all of it built on detachment, on being untouchable. The ghost has a weakness now, So-min says, setting down his glass with careful precision. Finally, his reflection in the window grins back, all teeth and hunger. After years of circling each other in this endless dance of blood and territory, the game has finally changed. And So-min has always been excellent at exploiting weakness. 2 weeks had passed since Rachel moved into the mansion, and the change in Junho was impossible to ignore. His men whispered about in the hallways, how the ghost now appeared at the dinner table each evening, how he listened to Rachel's rambling stories about her garden with something almost like patience. The night before, he'd actually laugh at one of her jokes about stubborn tomatoes, a sound so foreign that Min-jun had nearly dropped his phone. Rachel had a way of filling silence. She talked through meals, sharing memories of Hannah's childhood, asking Junho questions about his work that he deflected with increasing gentleness. "You remind me of my husband," she'd said once, reaching across to pat his scarred hand. Strong on the outside, soft within. Junho hadn't known how to respond to that. But the underworld doesn't respect domesticity. While Junho played house, sharks circled in darker waters. Kim So-min had been watching, waiting, calculating. The ghost's sudden protectiveness over a civilian wasn't strength. It was weakness. Blood in the water. The attack came on Rachel's birthday. Hannah had insisted on a small celebration. Just the 4 of them in the dining room. Junho had even allowed himself to relax slightly, his usual security detail reduced to just Min-jun stationed outside. A mistake, his first in years. The windows exploded inward with a deafening crash. Glass rained down as automatic gunfire tore through the curtains. Rachel screamed, and Junho's world contracted to a single point. Hannah threw herself over her grandmother, both women on the floor, vulnerable, his to protect. The transformation was instantaneous. The man who'd been smiling over birthday cake vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. But this time the ghost fought with a fury as men had never witnessed. Not the calculated brutality of a crime lord defending territory, but the savage desperation of someone protecting family. He moved like death itself through the chaos, each shot precise, each motion economical. Bodies fell. Blood sprayed across Rachel's floor wallpaper. Junho didn't care. His entire being focused on keeping the gunfire away from Rachel's wing. Then Kim So-min stepped through the shattered doorway, gun leveled at Hannah's head. Give up your territory, ghost, or watch them die. His smile was cold. Your choice. Junho's finger tightened on the trigger, his expression absolutely murderous. But his eyes flickered once to Rachel, still clutching Hannah beneath the table, and Kim So-min's smile widened. He'd found the ghost's weakness after all. The words left his mouth before his mind could stop them. Take it. Take all of it. Kim's pistol wavered, confusion fracturing his predatory certainty. Everything you built? It was never mine. Junho's voice carried the weight of years he'd forgotten how to count. It was survival. She's the only thing that was ever real. But surrender wasn't currency Kim accepted. He wanted spectacle, wanted the ghost broken and bleeding, wanted Gangnam to watch its phantom king crawl. You think money buys you out of this? I want your knees on this floor. I want you to beg. The fight that followed wasn't strategic. Junho gave ground deliberately, leading Kim's men away from the door where Rachel had slipped out with Hannah. He took bullets the old version of himself would have dodged, felt his blood paint the marble he'd once ruled like a god. His empire was a tomb, and he was finally ready to die in it. Then sirens. Impossibly close, impossibly fast. Rachel hadn't run. She called the police, done the one thing the ghost could never do, ask for help. In the chaos of raiding officers and scattering criminals, Junho moved through shadows one final time, not as the ghost of Gangnam, but as something smaller, something human. He left no trail, no legend, no empire, just blood on expensive floors, and a name that would fade into urban myth. 3 months later, Jun-suk came home from a construction site with paint under his fingernails and exhaustion in his bones. The apartment was small, the walls thin enough to hear neighbors arguing. Rachel stood at the stove, stirring soup that smelled like his childhood. Hannah sat at the table, doing homework without fear creasing her forehead. Tea's ready, Rachel said, pouring him a cup. Jun-suk's hands shook as he lifted it. Everything he'd built was gone. The penthouse, the network, the carefully constructed invincibility. The ghost was dead, dissolved into police reports and unanswered questions. But Jun-suk was alive. The tears came unexpectedly, dropping into his tea like rain. Rachel's hand found his shoulder, steady and warm. Welcome home, grandson. Hannah looked up from her homework, watching them. In her eyes, he saw understanding bloom. Monsters could die. Men could be reborn. And sometimes redemption wasn't about winning. It was about finally choosing to lose the right things. If this story of redemption moved you, show your support. Hit subscribe, like, and comment below. Click the notification bell so you never miss another powerful tale of transformation. Your engagement helps us bring more stories that matter. Thank you for being part of this journey.